Shabbat Shalom, everyone. My name is Dr. Yisrayl Hawkins, and I'd like to serve you forever as a priest starting very soon. It's now time to start finding your seats for Sabbath services. And with that, I'd like to turn over to Dr. Yisrayl Hawkins.
Shalom, everyone. My name is Dr. Yisrayl Hawkins, and I want to serve you forever as a priest starting very soon. It's a privilege and an honor to listen to the sons and daughters of Yisrayl Hawkins now entering the sanctuary. Now I turn it over to the great priest in the House of Yahweh.
And at this time, it's a privilege and honor to turn it over to the queens of the House of Yahweh.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone, and welcome home, saints of Yahweh. It's great to see you here. You'll all be seated. Okay, what we're going to do today is we're going to go over the foundation of the House of Yahweh. And I was given an inspiration for this verse. It says, Yeshua and his donkeys are the foundation, and Yisrael and his donkeys are the finishing. And I put this verse into the gematria, and one of the numbers that came up was 4318, and it was under the Jewish gematria. And this is from the gematrix.org on the website. And it comes from 4317, and it means a leading or bringing into the presence of. It also means that it's associated with the thought of freedom to enter through the assistance of another. Now, what does that point to? Who is assisting us into this kingdom of Yahweh in these last days? Can I hear that again, please? And he is being guided by who? Yeshua. Now, 4317 means to lead toward, also to bring or draw near. And he is leading us toward the kingdom of Yahweh. He is showing us and guiding us and teaching us what we need in order to be a part of this kingdom in these last days. It also comes from 72, and it means, now this describes pastor to a T. It means a bringing up, a mode of living, a manner of life, such as a teaching. He is teaching not only us here, but he is teaching the whole world through the guidance and inspiration of Yeshua, who is under the headship of Yahweh. It also means a training and a discipline. He is one of the most trained and disciplined persons that I know in the house of Yahweh, of Yahweh's laws, and he has the mercy and kindness of Yeshua and Yahweh to teach us lovingly, guiding the house of Yahweh. Now, another thing that I did was I took Yeshua, it's the foundation, and I broke it down into two phrases. And the first phrase, can I have the second one? The second phrase is Yisrael and his donkeys are the finishing. Yisrael and his donkeys are the finishing. Now that number was 2168, and it's a primary root, and we're to compare it to 2167, and it means to trim, a vine, prune. Now, who is trimming and pruning us under Pastor Yisrael? Who is actually trimming the vine for us? And Pastor is guiding us. Do we know who's doing the trimming? Who's actually trimming the vine? Is that Yeshua? Because Yeshua is the vine, but Yahweh is actually the vine keeper, and he is actually guiding Yeshua. Yeshua has proved himself worthy in these last days, and Yeshua is reaching out to the branches, and he is teaching us everything that we need to do. He's fine-tuning everything. Yisrael is just so joyful in doing what Yeshua asks him to do, that we can see it in every word he says, every step he takes, every work that he does. Okay, now the second number comes from the English gematria, and it's 2454, and it's a collateral form of 2451. which means wisdom. And they say, every wise woman. Hey, remember last Sabbath, the overseer was speaking about the women of the holy women of Nu. Now, who are the holy women of Nu? If you know who it is, raise your hands. That's right. We are the holy women of Nu in this generation. And he brought this out because he said, they've spoken about the women of old. Now is the time to speak of the women of Nu. Now, I took the holy women of Nu and put it in the gematria. And if I can have my next one. Oh, you have it already. Okay. Now, the Jewish gematria, it was 2617, comes from 2616, and it means kindness by implication. And those words in parentheses were actually in the Strong's Concordance Red Letter Edition. Toward Yahweh. Very rarely does the Strong's Concordance ever use the name Yahweh, but in this specific sense, in this specific word, it actually says toward Yahweh. So the overseer is bringing us, the women of Nu, and he's bringing us forward toward Yahweh so that we can be his servants in these last days, so that we can bring forth the teachings that the overseer is bringing and guiding us with, so that when these women come from this war-torn world and this destruction that is coming upon the world in these last days, we, the women of Nu, that's you and me, are going to be there with loving kindness, mercy, righteousness. We are going to be merciful. We are going to have the 13 attributes of Yahweh because Pastor gave them to us and taught us to them. Now, the number 2, in general, it means there's 3 basic meanings which always interact with this word. It's strength, steadfastness, and love. Those are the attributes of Yahweh, strength, steadfastness, and love. And it also refers to the rights and obligations between the parties of a relationship, especially Yahweh and Israel. Okay, now it goes on, there's other things that go with it. Now, this is the last one that I did. It's bringing the women back to Yahweh. That is what Yahweh has inspired Yisrayl Hawkins to do. And I did the gematria in that, and it's 8117, it comes from 8110, which means guardianship. Something preserved. 8105 means something preserved. 8104 means to guard, protect, attend to, keep. It means to keep in the sense of taking care of. That is, Pastor, to the absolute letter of everything that this says. Now we want to, my last one. Now we want you to remember these words. Yisrael, Yeshua and his donkeys are the foundation. Yisrael and his donkeys are the finishing. And the finishing is wisdom of every woman. And with that, we'll turn it over to the next speaker.
Shalom, House of Yahweh. Please be seated. Yahweh's peace be with you. Shabbat Shalom. So it's interesting how Yahweh works, because what she was talking about, the holy women of Nu, kind of flows into what I would like to be speaking about today. Now, the great training that overseer was put through whenever he was a young child, the very primary years, like the ages from the womb to 6 years old, are very crucial years for our child, because this is whenever the neurons or our nerve brain cells are making these connections, and they're firing like crazy, and they're setting up the strong pathways of what our brain's going to keep based on the teachings that we're receiving. So just keep that in mind, because this also reminds me of Samuel and Moshe, and there's other examples, but mainly Samuel and Moshe, because they were trained at a very, very young age, and that training, it was like a core foundation for them as they grew up, and they were guiding millions and hundreds of thousands of people. So the first number I want to share with you is 2088. This 2088, what's very interesting is it keeps popping up. And if you turn over to Daniel chapter 12, verse 5, it says, "Then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, there stood two others, one on this side of the bank of the river, and the other on that side of the bank of the river." And this is showing, Daniel is showing us that these are the two witnesses that he was seeing, right? So going over to verse 1, it says, "And at that time will Micaiah stand up, the great ruler who stands at Abel for the children of your people, and there will be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation to that same time. And at that time your people will be delivered, everyone who will be found written in the book of life." Now, there's lots of things going on in that particular scripture. One, Micaiah is also known as he who rules as Yahweh. So Yisrayl Hawkins is he who rules as Yahweh, will stand up, the great ruler who stands for the children of your people. And this leads me into another thing that I want to speak about, because overseer has been setting up these since he's established the House of Yahweh, putting it in our minds how important it is to diligently train and teach our children. When we walk on the road, he's all like, "How many times do you wake up? How many times do you go to bed?" So with that in mind, there's different things like the lamp lighting that we are learning about, the children's Be Teachers class, the Learn to Grow series, the Yisrayl Ask program, and the House of Yahweh board games. And these are creative ways in order to engage with our children, to make it a common place to speak scriptures with our little people. Now, here's what's interesting. Back to the 2088, because this right here, I like to connect it to overseer because it's always saying on this side, the man on that side, and we can link that with that scripture, Daniel 12:5, that specifically is talking about the two witnesses. So with 2088, we have in the gematria, who is the olive branch? Who is the olive branch? 2088. Under the authority of Yeshua, high priest, 2088. And the next one is empty the golden oil through them, 2088. You see how this 2088 is a very strong number that keeps popping out, and it's pointing directly to the witness. Now, here's what's also amazing is the mouth of Yahweh commanded me, saying, put in the gematria, where is the Yisrayl Ask program? And this program is encouraging the children to not only answer questions, but to ask questions themselves. And just to go back and forth with the children answering and asking these questions. And where is the Yisrayl Ask program? The number is 2088. I find that super amazing. I would like to turn to Isaiah. With this specific scripture, I wanted to look at, 44 starts off talking about the two witnesses, right? And then on verse 3, it says, in the middle of it, it says, "I will pour out my spirit upon your seed and my blessing upon your offspring," not talking about the house of Yahweh and the children. "They will spring up among the grass as well as by the water's courses." Now, to bring to your remembrance, when you put in the gematria, verse 3 and 4, it comes out to 2483 when the house of Yahweh was established. And I thought that was interesting to mention. And if you look over to Yael chapter 2, verse 28, and it says, "And it will come to pass afterward, I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters will prophesy. Your old men will dream dreams, and your young men will see visions." Overseer is doing an amazing work in these last days by teaching us how to teach ourselves, and not only that, but to teach our children diligently so they can fulfill this prophecy in a very timely manner. Praise Yahweh. Now with this, I would like to go ahead and hand it over to the next speaker.
Shabbat Shalom, righteous saints. You may be seated. The title of my speech today is Making a Lasting Impression. How many of us remember when our overseer spoke about the year of impression, referring to the work that the House of Yahweh is engaged in with our children? Any hands? Year of impression? Okay, one hand. Okay, all right. I remember how amazed I was when I heard that. And Pastor went on to say how around 4 years old is the year of impression. And I immediately thought back to the year I was asked to work with 22 4-year-olds and how reluctant I was. I remember saying something like, me? They're so little. What can I do with them? And my supervisor said, I think you will do fine. Well, I wasn't that confident, but I accepted. And looking back, those were some of the best years I've ever had. And I see some moms nodding because you have some 4-year-olds, don't you? I learned that 4-year-olds were capable of learning a lot more than I anticipated. They were eager to learn, eager to please, and willing to adjust and change. But I thought about the impression that Pastor is referring to and realized he was aiming for something bigger, better, and lasting. He was bringing forth a work with our children, 4-year-olds and us older children, a work that is making a lasting impression on their minds. So I went to the dictionary to get a better understanding of the word impression, to see what exactly is Pastor getting at. And the first meaning from Merriam-Webster's dictionary says, a characteristic, trait, or feature resulting from some influence. Think about the positive character traits that are being built, impressed upon a child's mind as they get to speak, teach a class, and participate in any aspect of teaching. Respect. They become knowledgeable, they become zealous. And I remember a few young ladies, it was so, we had to do a lot of nudging and pushing to get them to even stand up in front of a group. And I remember one speech class I listened, she was up there. I didn't hear anything, but it was wonderful. She was up there. And now, great teacher. Praise Yahweh. The second meaning, an effect or alteration or improvement. It's not always evident the righteous effect the impression is having, nor is the improvement readily available. But sisters, does that mean that the impression is not being made? No, it doesn't. But as we layer the impression with kindness, patience, and zeal for what we are doing, we will see the positive effect. Philippians 1:6 says, being confident of this very thing, that he who has begun a righteous work in you, in me, in our children, will continue to do it, will continue to perfection until the day of Yeshua Messiah. A third meaning is a telling image impressed on the senses or mind. Sisters, what image are we impressing on our children's mind? Yahweh, correct? Yes? Nod your heads if you agree with me. Yes, yes. One way to do this is reviewing Sabbath notes with our children and showing a keen interest in what they learned from each speaker. One of my go-to questions that I like to use is, tell me in your own words what pastor talked about or spoke on, like a particular topic. Tell me in your own words. And that's a great way to gauge what they got from pastor's sermon. Another thing you can do is you can make a set of question and answer cards for them to match up. Younger children, you can write questions on them for them to answer. They can pull it from a basket or hat. Older children can write their own questions about what was taught that Sabbath for the whole family to answer. And one other thing that I really enjoy, I don't know about, a lot of people don't like homework, they hate homework. I love homework, frankly. And so when pastor and the Kohans or the Kohanas give us homework, I love it. And so I was doing a little bit of research on the word renew, and guess what? The children wanted to join in as well. So I brought just a sample of what one of our students did. Yahweh, renew our hearts with a clean and holy spirit. There it is. And there's another one. Okay, and she made that very, very pretty, very, very beautiful. Again, it's with renew, but giving them that opportunity because they really, really want to learn and to grow alongside with us and our overseer. So let's continue to join with our overseer in this work of making a lasting impression on our children's minds. As it says in Ecclesiastes 12:13 through 14, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter, reverence Yahweh by observing, keeping his laws, for this is the whole duty of man. For Yahweh will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether it is righteous or whether it is evil. It is from the impression we help make on our children's minds they will pull from to make decisions. Let us make only the impressions that will be able to last forever. As we say here in the great House of Yahweh, if it's not forever, praise Yahweh. Please stand and welcome our next speaker.
Shalom, holy women of New. Please be seated. The other day, in preparing for this message, I was going in my Strongs, getting to the number I wanted to go to, but my eye fell on another number in the process. It was number 5707. And I had it underlined, so I thought, let me just take a minute here and read this. And it meant a witness. And in the Hebrew, that number is Ed. Can I have the first page, please? And if you look at Ed, that's what that means. And if you look at it, I did the gematria on Ed, and when you add the three numbers together, it comes to 72. Now that's going to tie in with the holy women of Nu of what I'm going to speak about. Well, before I did that, I thought, well, the next time I get an opportunity to speak with the overseer, I'm going to call him Ed. And so I did. He called and I said, I'm calling you Ed. And he's like, why would you call me Ed? And I said, I'll call you Ed because the scripture says it's a witness, and you're a witness. So he just like, okay, click. So now we're going to focus on the holy women of Nu. And I know you saw these numbers before by the great Kohana ahead of me, so I'm not going over those. But when I put that in, I also put in the holy helpmeets of Nu. Because in Genesis, Yahweh said that Adam, there was no one to be a helpmeet for Adam until Genesis 2, verse 23. We can put that next one up. Genesis 2, I have that one. Genesis 2:23, and you can see that there is where he called his helpmeet woman. Notice that 223 backwards is 322. Is that a coincidence, or are you thinking that maybe we were foreordained way back then to help in these last times as the women of Nu? So that number 322, I'm reminding you that that's the overseer's tag number that Yahweh gave him a long, long time ago, brought forth in these last days on his van, 322. So the word helpmeet, let's look at that one. If you go to the Strong's, it's number 5828. Now, is that not amazing that in that word helpmeet, you have the overseer's birth date, 828. Remember, that number, 828, belongs to the overseer. That number 5, I'm going to show that it belongs to the holy women of Nu. Now, it's in the scriptures 21 times, which I thought was pretty interesting. For on 7707, which is 3 sevens, 21, Pastor had a vision of gold flakes falling. And he said, try to figure out what this means. And I think Yahweh showed me what this means. I think that we, the holy women of Nu, were those gold flakes falling before the pastor's very eyes. But that's just my thought on the whole thing. But in the Bollingers, the number 5 represents strength, and it represents a sparing. And in Bollingers, he explains that we were given 5 senses. We were given 1, the hearing, so that we could hear the message of the kingdom, Matthew 24:14. We were given the eyes to see the written word, the publishing, Yachanan Mark 13:10. And then he went on to explain that your hands have 5 fingers each. So that is to do the work that once you put that understanding that's given by our 828, the pastor's birth date, and we put that in our mind, it goes into our heart. From our heart comes out with what our hands do. And he also explained that our feet have 5 toes each to show that we are to walk in the way of Yahweh. And I just thought that whole thing was like so amazing. So in thinking of all that, I thought of the woman, you can keep, no, not that one yet. The woman Yisrayl in Judges. And that's in Judges chapter 5, no less, talking about the number 5, where if you remember what she did, she went in and delivered Israel from the hands of Sisera. She drove that pen stake through his temple. And her name is in the scriptures 23 times, and that means Father of Gathering. Holy women of Yahweh, we are ones that are going and are ordained to help the overseer. The 5 is helping the overseer, 828, to bring in the gathering of the women. It says here in Yisrayl chapter 5 that Yisrayl was most blessed among women. We, the holy women of Nu, are the most blessed of all generations. We are going to be talked about. We are going to be explaining these things to all the other women. And we have this awesome, awesome responsibility under the 828, pastor's birth date, Yisrayl Hawkins. So I thought, well, Yisrayl, even her name only has 5 letters. So I'm thinking, this is all just really pretty great. But I thought, if you took out the A, like they say in Hebrew, they have vowel points. I said, what if I took out the A and just put YH, which is Yisrayl Hawkins. When he signs his name, it's YH when he approves something. And then YL, which means strength. And I put that in the gematria. And you can see what that comes up to, 828, which is like so amazing. Once again, we see the overseer's birth date, 828. Only Yahweh could bring this all about. Only he could make this work out. But look at the other numbers. Now, as she lifts up that other paper, you'll see last week we went over the name Yahweh. And to show how Yahweh is so connected to our overseer in these last days, you see the numbers in Yahweh, 420, and the 70 is the same as in YHYL, Israel, the strength. 42070. I would love that my number would come up with Yahweh's numbers, but you know what? I'm a number 5, and I'm putting my hand to this work just as the holy women of New in this room are. So remember, our hand is set to do the work. Only to be obedient unto the one that Yahweh has sent can we have success. So I know you're in unity when I say, blessed is Yisrayl Hawkins who comes in the name of Yahweh. May Yahweh is glorified.
Please be seated. Did everyone enjoy our speakers this morning? I got a question for you. Who wants to hear from Ed today? Okay, so without any further delay, I'd like to turn it over to the great priest in the House of Yahweh.
Shabbat Shalom. At this time, we get to hear from the great deacon, Michael Osser.
Shabbat Shalom, great saints of Yahweh. Please be seated. Peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of us. If you'll turn over quickly, we got a lot to cover, to Revelation 12. Revelation 12, that's found on page 978. Revelation 12 on page 978. We're going to move rather quickly here. Okay, I got to explain some things here, and we're going to start at verse 7. And there was war in heaven, and there was war in heaven, and Satan started a war in heaven. Micaiah fought with her Malachim, fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought with her angels. Now, we're going to cover that in a moment. But did not prevail, nor was there a place note found in heaven, any more found in heaven for her. She was not allowed to be there anymore. Now, let's look over at verse 9. And the great dragon was cast out, the old serpent called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. She was cast into the earth, and her angels were cast out with her. And I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now has come salvation, strength, the kingdom of our Father, and the power of his Messiah. For the accuser of our brothers is cast down, who accused them before our Father day and night. Okay, let's look down to verse 12. Therefore rejoice, you heavens, and you who dwell in them, all the inhabitants of the heavens. So, rejoice, you heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because she knows she has but a short time. She was no longer allowed to be in heaven, anywhere in heaven. She was cast to the earth. There was a judgment made, and she was told to go where she needed to be put for the court judgment to be followed through. Now, let's look back to verse 7, and there was war in heaven. Okay. Yahweh doesn't war. Yahshua Messiah doesn't war. Yisrayl Hawkins in the House of Yahweh, we do not war. Not in any way, shape, or form. That's a Catholic doctrine. The gods war, man wars, without Yahweh's knowledge, guidance, and his laws, or the one sent. So, Micaiah, well, we know from Daniel 12:1, that's Yisrayl Hawkins. So, Yisrayl Hawkins strives with his servants to bring forth the message of the kingdom day and night, and Satan has started a war against Yahweh's house to try and stop him and us. So let that be certain in your minds and very, very clear. We don't war in any way, shape, or form. We care for one another, we love one another, we serve one another, and we guide and help each other, right? Praise Yahweh. Okay, let's get into the codes. The codes cover a lot of this, and the codes actually show what went through the minds of Hillel and her gods when they saw these things coming at the planet. So let's get into this. There's my chart. Okay. All right. So let me get my... All right, so the main was war in heaven, and that's right here. War in heaven. Now I'm going to go a little quick here. War in heaven. Now the first thing that came up was right here. And that was the Hebrew year 1991 to 1992. Now in that year, 1991 to 1992, the comet broke into 21 fragments and traveled through space for 2 years before it even hit the planet. So in that year, 1992, it broke into fragments, into the 21 fragments. Now it starts getting into judgment. So over here, and this was all together, casting out by Yahweh's authority. Okay? Casting out by Yahweh's authority. Okay? And where was she cast out from? Okay? If we look right here, this long line, not these here. I'll try and speak a little louder so we don't get a hum. Right here is Jupiter. Okay? Then we have Comet. We have Comet right there. And this was legal, and it was an ultimatum. It was a legal ultimatum brought forth that was established in the courts of Yahweh Shema that she was not allowed to be on Jupiter anymore. That's heaven. She wasn't allowed in heaven. She was supposed to be cast to the earth. Now the next one, kind of look here, right here is pounding. And remember, I remember one of the articles that said, in the news article, it said, Jupiter is receiving a pounding, or is being pounded at this time. Pounding. And then right up here is universal. Okay, so Jupiter started getting hit. And the next things that started coming up, I mean, I couldn't believe these things were coming up. Right here we have Hillel, demons. Hillel and demons crosses it. Now I want to note, the skip on this was 9043. Well, there's no Hebrew or Greek word 9043, so I went 943. And I looked this up after these coming words. And they go right along with the words that came up in the code. So let's go back to the code. Okay, so again we have Hillel and demons. Then we have perplexed. Perplexed. Okay. Then we have scared. Scared. Then we have, and this is all in this one word, the meanings, panic, dread, fright, terror. They were freaking out when they saw these things coming towards their planet. Now note, the comet hit the lowest part of the planet, the lower southern hemisphere. And I was talking with Pastor Israel, and I don't believe Yahweh wanted to hurt them in any way, but they were to follow the instructions given to them by the courts of Yahweh Shema that they were not allowed to be in heaven anymore. And Jupiter was the largest planet. It was given to her to guide and monitor mankind's progress. But of course, she trespassed on the earth, and of course, here we are now. But I don't think he wanted to hurt them. He just wanted to warn them with the ultimatum that you are to go to earth. You're not allowed in heaven anymore. Okay, let's go back to the codes. The next thing that followed after the scared, perplexed and confused, panic, dread, and fright and terror is right here. Crying, angry wife. Crying, angry wife. Because she was so angry, it started bringing her to tears. Then, seeking retaliation, that was in her heart and mind, to retaliate against Yahweh in any way she could. But the last thing that came up, HOY, guarded and kept safe. HOY, guarded and kept safe. And of course, at this time, Jupiter is at the closest part of the earth that it's been in a long time. You can see it in the evening after sunset, around 10. You look in the east, you can see it. It's very clear. If you got binoculars, you can actually see the moons. It's so close. And there's a significance to that. So remember, we don't war. That's the gods. That's mankind's way. That's Satan's way. So I encourage everybody to always remember these things. And for more information on the war in heaven, you can look at Unveiling Satan or the Nuclear Baby book. So with that, if you'll all please stand. Yahweh bless your feast. Have a great feast. This time I have the honor and privilege to turn over to a great priest in Yahweh's house, the great Kohan Yisrayl Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Please be seated. We're going to continue today on this topic we've been working on about the work of the House of Yahweh during the so-called missing week of Daniel. That's how confused the Christian world is. Turn over to Daniel 9. It's the missing week. Where did it go? Well, we're in the middle of it right now. If they haven't figured that out already, if they haven't been paying attention. But remember our work in Daniel 9:24, 70 weeks are determined upon your people. This is for the entire plan of Yahweh. And no, it just didn't take 70 weeks. It took 70 weeks of years with times in between the times of action. And we'll get back to that later on this feast, verse 24. But for right now, look down at verse 27. And he will confirm a covenant with Rabin for 1 week, 7 years. And that was a 7-year agreement. Okay, make no mistake about it. This is Yahweh's main thing that he's concerned with here is these 7 years of action. And that's what we need to keep our minds on. During the midst, and we are into the midst right now if we're not out of it, like Pastor said last week. It is starting in 9/13/93 was when the Oslo Agreement was signed. And then it went into effect on 10/13/93, and it was a 7-year plan. We'll see more about that. Our sound man at the time caught that on the news, that it was a 7-year plan that they worked on. And remember, this was signed on the White House lawn between the Palestinians, represented by Yasser Arafat and Mahmoud Abbas, and the Israelis. They had Yitzhak Rabin and Shimon Peres, Secretary of State Warren Christopher. All right? And then representatives of Russia also. But this was a 7-year plan. Then in 1997, another prophecy started to be fulfilled. If you turn over to Yisrayl, we're going to rehearse this a little bit to get it firm in our mind here of these prophecies, because they are sure, they are coming to pass. The ones that already came to pass should prove to anyone that the rest of the prophecies is going to take place. But in Yisrayl 2:14, who knows if he may turn, now it's not Yahweh turning and repenting, but that they may turn. That blowing the trumpet didn't take place till a certain time period, in 1997. Little did we know that the peace plan was about to get shut down. All right? And we saw this work started in Israel in earnest in the 3rd Roman month of 1997 here. And the very first meeting we had, now Pastor had been to Israel before that, trying to show these things, and we'll see a few things that were tried and it didn't go through because it wasn't Yahweh's time. But turn over to Yeketskia 40. This was the first thing that, and hold your place there, and turn over to Revelation 11. Because the very first prophecy that we ever knew about, that I was ever shown about the 2 witnesses, it started with Revelation 11. And then when Yahweh opened up the understanding, Revelation 11 and Isaiah 44, then as Yahweh opened up our minds, and Pastor kept teaching us and teaching us and teaching us, we saw more. But the first thing we learned about the 2 witnesses was in Revelation 11. And there was given me a reed like a measuring rod. And the Malach stood, saying, Rise and measure the temple of Yahweh and the altar in its confines where they worship within. But the court which is outside the temple, verse 2, leave out and measure it not, for it is given to the Gentiles, the nations. And we'll see more about this here as we go through the feast. And the holy city they will tread underfoot 42 moons. And I will give power and authority to my 2 witnesses to perform their prophetic offices, and they will foretell. They will foretell. We're going to get deeper into that as we go along. They will foretell. I don't see anybody else, and you can't find anything else in any of the other prophecies of who will foretell events, any events in the future, but specifically about the 1,260 days, those cast about with darkness. That's the last half of the 7 years. The last half. They prophesy about this. But it includes this message about the temple that we brought to them. And the very first meeting, as we spoke about, was held in Tel Aviv at a journalist location. It's called the Journalist House there in Tel Aviv. And Pastor performed the prophecy in Yeketskia 40, verse 2. Well, let's look down to verse 4 and the very last phrase. Declare all that you see to the house of Israel. Look up at verse 3. Then he took me there, then behold, a being, manlike, whose appearance resembled bronze, with a line of flax and a measuring reed in his hand. He stood in the clearing or opening. This is Pastor here with the measuring rod, ready to measure this temple that had never been built. Yeketskia's temple has never been built according to the exact measurements. The proportions are the same. That's another topic. But the actual measurements have never been used. So this was a prophecy. I'll read you some more. I don't want to get bogged down and get repetitive here. But on 3/10/97, Yisrayl Hawkins, Kohan David Hamerman, and myself, we held this press conference, and we showed him this pattern for the very first time. All right, the very first time anyone had showed or taught or spoken about Yeketskia's temple. The very first time to all the journalists, and they put it in the news here for the entire country to read. I wanted to read to you one more article here about the plan, about the press conference that we brought out. It says, the plan to build the temple in the ways of peace and with acceptance by the Arabs. Most of the world leaders usually speak about peace, while at the same time, actually, they are making preparations for war. I'll tell you, the way they wrote these articles, it was really like Pastor wrote a newsletter. It's really amazing what Yahweh inspired to go out to the entire country because of this meeting. And Pastor had tried before, met with other small groups, the Temple Institute and so on, and they agreed that this message was right, that we had the answers, but it never got widespread publicity or spread around the country until a certain time. Okay, until a certain time, until Yahweh's time. But the real danger exists if the Mediterranean region, they call it the Mediterranean region, it's the Middle East. Remember, in and around the great river Euphrates, they didn't know all the prophecies, these article writers, where interests which are vital to the powerful nations and to the world exist. The Arab-Israeli conflict that has tried to be solved in peaceful solutions may cause a world explosion and a fatal war as long as the problem of the Temple Mount is not solved to the satisfaction of the Arabs and Jews alike. And the entire Muslim world is looking toward this plan between Israel and Palestine, and especially the dividing of Jerusalem, okay, as the means of peace, and stymieing it and shutting it down and coming against it like a Kurd only serves to rile things up even more. Because we know that plan, that covenant that they signed with Rabin, they think they got the way to bring peace. But the only thing that they have to be able to bring is war. They just can't see it because they're leaving out the real peaceful solution. This was related by the Jewish American author and historian Yisrayl Hawkins at a press conference. Yisrayl Hawkins said at the press conference that all it takes is for one fanatic from either side to set up the fire of war, especially in light of the permanent tension which exists between the Arabs and Jews, particularly on issues of Jerusalem on Temple and the Temple Mount. According to Hawkins, the Dome of the Rock was not built on the site where the temple was built, and the original location of the temple is about 100 meters northeast of the Dome of the Rock. This fact enables the rebuilding of the temple next to the Dome of the Rock on a vacant piece of land by ways of peace and acceptance of the Arabs, by conducting negotiations that may last several years, which they did, and by teaching and presenting data and facts that will convince them that Muslims and Jews can pray side by side in private without interrupting each other. And then the article goes to showing about some of Yeketskia's prophecies here about the city of Tyre. The prophecy was made in 585 BY. They said BCE. They didn't know. But then it didn't actually take place until much later, 332 BCE, under the hands of Alexander the Great, after the siege that lasted for 7 months. And this is another proof to the truthfulness in the visions of the prophet Yeketskia. So Pastor was teaching him at that time that fulfilled prophecy is proof that we can trust the Scriptures. And that's what he's been driving into our minds and hearts all these years about this. And showing in Yeketskia 40 verse 5 that there was an adjoining separation, a dividing structure around the temple, that Hawkins adds and says, never in the history of the temple did it exist without an outer court. Yet there never was, next to the Temple Mount, or temple on the Temple Mount, a Muslim structure. There never was, so they never had to worry about it. It never existed until not in the last days, but in the early Middle Ages is when they built it, but it was never an issue until the last days on the rebuilding. Also, they mentioned about Asher Kaufman's work, that he showed beyond a doubt that the first and second temples were situated exactly in one direct line with the Golden Gate, the Eastern Gate. And so there's no doubt about this temple and about the facts. And that's what the article says, that the facts would be shown. Hawkins calls upon all leaders of the region, including Benjamin Netanyahu, Yasser Arafat, Hosni Mubarak. He was the prime minister of Egypt at the time, or king of Egypt, whatever he was. King Hussein of Jordan. All right, this is who he mentioned, and we'll see a bit later that he met with their representatives to take great action in order to realize and implement Yeketskia's vision for real peace. As a matter of fact, when we first had our meeting with our people that we were working with in Israel, they were astounded at this, and the man said to Pastor, he said, "You are the modern day Yeketskia," he said. And I'm telling you, this man was very sincere and is still sincere about this work today. All right. So we see that Yisrayl Hawkins and the House of Yahweh showed them as prophesied and commanded by Yahweh and Yael too there in Yeketskia 40 to declare all that you see to the house of Israel. First, he declared to them the name of Yahweh. Pastor never once shrank back from using the name Yahweh at all in front of them, even though that was the one name they would never pronounce. Then he showed them the prophecies of Yahweh. You know, the prophecies of the temple, but he also showed in this war. Remember, he talked about this fatal war. He's talking about the all-out nuclear war that Daniel spoke about there that's coming along with these other prophecies. Just as sure as there's a building to the south of the temple where the temple used to stand, south of that original spot, there's a building there now. Just as sure as that's a fact, and you can see it with your own eyes, as sure as that's true, so are the nuclear wars that are coming. And he showed him this destruction and why. Why at the hands of man's government. Okay? And these are the days clothed with darkness. Pastor also showed him, before it actually existed in book form, he was teaching him the Peaceful Solution character education program. How two peoples could live side by side without trying to change one another, kill one another, destroy one another, or destroy each other's property, how they could live peacefully side by side. He was teaching them the character education program. That was the whole lesson of this temple. It was the character education program. And then over the years, Pastor made 7 trips to the land of Israel declaring this. I told you before that certain things couldn't take place, one of which was getting into the Knesset. Pastor told us years ago how when they tried to not force their way in, but make some calls and demand to get into the Knesset on this one trip, that when they left, they started going through their luggage and throwing it on the tarmac and all this. But it wasn't Yahweh's time. But during those 7 years, we met with 14 members of Knesset, high-ranking members, ministers. These were part of the cabinet, ministers of education, minister of security. We met with Shimon Peres, sat at a table, Pastor and Shimon Peres having a one-on-one conversation. And it was Shimon Peres said, "This will work. You just got to watch the teachers," was what Shimon Peres said. Amazing. We met with, there's so many here, the actual president of Israel at that time, Ezer Weitzman. He met with Omar Rifai, the ambassador of Jordan. Now that ambassador of Jordan answers directly to King Hussein, or did in those days. King Hussein has since died. Mohammed Bassiouni, ambassador of Egypt. These are these leaders' direct representatives. All right, we met with David Bar-Ilan, who is Netanyahu's #1 advisor. Okay, to give him the very same message, not only about the temple, but about the character education, what would really change the hearts and minds of the people. Then, like I said, 14 members of Knesset, various mayors of cities all over Jerusalem. Pastor told us about Daniel Vaknin, the mayor who was a general in the army, and the only thing he knew was war. And he was shocked when, there's a program that can teach us to get along with our enemies. We don't have to destroy them, though those who disagree. We can come to agreement. Also, there's just so many. We met in Abelin, Israel, and there was already a school ran by a Catholic guy, but they still, in Abelin, wanted the Peaceful Solution to build a school, and we actually visited and saw the land that we're going to use one day. We are going to use it. We are going to have a school for peace there. There's no doubt about it. Okay, it's not time yet. You can't force these things, as we'll see tomorrow, more in detail here about these prophecies and about the stopping of the 3.5 years and what it means and what took place during this midst. A lot of things took place, but Yahweh wants us to keep our minds on the fact that it's a 7-year plan of action. 7 years. 7 years. You're going to hear this over and over this feast. 7-year plan. With that, if everyone will please stand. It's now my great honor and privilege to turn the services over to the great Kohan Benjamin Hawkins.
Stop, think. Yahweh's peace be with you. Please be seated. Okay, we're going to, if we could please have the first title slide. We're going to do part 2 of this time of war that we talked about last Sabbath. You remember some of these, we'll go over a few of the details here in the beginning here. Can I have the first slide? Okay. By the way, 512 just went by a few days ago, and I'm sure everybody here was wondering what took place on 512 this year. Well, keep wondering, okay? But something took place, and Yahweh gave a very, very awesome sign to his house that you're going to learn about at some point. I don't know when we'll get to it, but Abel 7 was the date. And if you'll look at this gematria for Abel 7, 2019, and it was Omer 21 on 512. Okay? If you'll notice, 523 is the number you get. Well, what is 523? We heard something about 23 in the number 5 this morning, but it points back to a Feast of Pentecost, the extended Feast of Pentecost in 2015, when Pastor told us on 523:15 about that 512 dream for the first time. Okay? That Yahweh's in full control. All right? And if you'll notice, 512 dream, Pentecost 2015, you get 512 and 3072. Okay? 3072 means Yahweh Zitkanu in Hebrew, and it means Yahweh's our righteousness. And that was one of the scriptures that he spoke about on 523:15. He only went to 2 different places on the 23rd, 523:15. He went to Jeremiah 23 and Psalm 23. Those were the only 2 scriptural references he made that whole sermon. Okay, and in that it talks about this branch being sent in the last days, and that this is the name that he will proclaim to them, or to us, Yahweh Zitkanu, Yahweh our righteousness. Okay, and remember, Yahweh Zitkanu is 1074 in gematria. Can I have my next slide? There's also another number associated with Yahweh Zitkanu, which is 1840, and it means Daniel. Okay? And Daniel spoke about in Daniel 12:7, where this last 3.5 years, last 7-year time period is spoken of, that the great Kohan just spoke about. He says, "Then I heard the man clothed in linen, who on that future day is teaching, when he held up his right hand and his left hand toward heaven, and vowed by him who lives forever," that there would be a time, it would be for a time, and dividing of times. When you put in man clothed in linen, who on that future day is teaching, you'll also get 512 and 3072 with those meanings that I just showed you. And you'll see here, he vowed in Daniel 12:7 is 322, pastor's tag. Okay? It's showing you that this is the one that vowed these things would take place in this time period. Can I have my next slide? Okay, so this is, and I'm going to have to use worldly names because these are names that were being in use at that time, but the May 23rd, 1994 issue of Time magazine. I want you to notice it's about the war on Jupiter. You see those 21 fragments headed toward the planet in this cosmic crash. I want you to notice a number off to the side there. Would you believe that's the number of the issue of the magazine? 21. 21. All we did was blow it up. That's the only number on there, 21. Now, what's the significance of that? We'll see here in a minute. Can I have my next slide? Pastor told us in Unveiling Satan, page 2, that Yahweh carefully thought out this plan for war. And that means that Yahweh doesn't promote war, but Yahweh allowed certain things to take place to make sure that, boundaries were kept. And Satan, did what she was supposed to do, which was get off of Jupiter and get here to this earth. It says 21, he mentions the word 21, that hit the planet is prophetic. The number 21 is made up of 3 sevens. The number 7 is Yahweh's complete number. And the fact that there was 21 of these boulders, or what we call hailstones in Scripture, or sling stones, The fact that these 21 equals 3 sevens makes it even more obvious that this war comes from Yahweh's command, or that Yahweh allowed this to take place. That war in heaven, or that magazine, that issue of Time magazine, came out exactly 21 years to the day that Pastor had that 5:23 dream in 2015. 21 years exactly. 3 sevens. Showing Yahweh's in full control. Now this year, I was on the phone with Pastor on the 23rd of the 5th Roman month. And can I have my next slide? This popped up on my screen. It was Theresa May, okay, and it was showing that she was getting ready to resign. And it said, end of May, hours away. This is the Drudge Report on May 23rd, 2019. Now, on 5/4/19, I mentioned in my sermon, and I gave about the Mary, the booklet, Who Do You Worship? I said, May, this is a great time to bring this out because May means Mary. And then on the very last service of this month, this Roman month of May, Pastor said the same thing. But here's behindthename.com about the word May. It comes from the word Maya, the name of a Roman goddess. May is another name of the hawthorn flower. It's also used as the diminutive, meaning a smaller, this is the smaller form of the word, a diminutive of Mary. Mary, okay? So we see the end of May, hours away, on May 23rd on the Drudge Report, or end of Mary, so to speak. Her time is up about. Can we have the next slide? Now, this is from the second book of Israel, chapter 36, verse 80. Pastor says, if you haven't seen a Time magazine dated May 23rd, you might want to get one to look at. They have a picture of the giant eye of Jupiter. Yahweh willing, we'll have this picture on the cover of the prophetic word also. Now, you've heard that in the news over the last few weeks, Jupiter has been in the news because there's something taking place with the great red spot that Pastor just talked about, this giant eye on Jupiter. The great Deacon Michael just alluded to something that'll make sense if you'll listen. This man, Andy Casely, he's an astronomer. He says, he posted this on 5/26/19. He says, I've been imaging and mapping great red spot dramas over the past week. After shedding some giant bands of red material, likely due to interactions with smaller vortices, it's maybe about 5 to 10% smaller. Just over a week. Another event is brewing too, he said. Now look, here's the week that he monitored it. Notice the last day on that monitoring? 5/23. 5/23. What a miraculous thing, right? 5/23. Can I have my next slide? And that great red spot, take a look at it. Remember what you just heard about a monitoring station. You see that eye? That's right, it's watching, okay? That's what the Catholics and the Freemasons know as the all-seeing eye, okay? Remember, the Catholic Church is called the Holy See, okay? Where the priests of Jupiter reside. You see down here the Eye of Horus, or the eye, they call it the Eye of Horus. We'll show how that all ties in later. I don't have time today. But you'll notice the great red spot is just an eye. Okay, it's an eye. Can I have my next slide? This was one of the headlines. There's many of them about this unraveling right now taking place on Jupiter's great red spot. It says, Jupiter's great red spot, current unraveling. So I put in great red spot unraveling, and you'll notice here, the 10th book of Israel, part 2, Yisrayl Hawkins, it says, chapter 16, verse 98, because that's one of the numbers in that gematria there, 1698, where Pastor talks about an event on Jupiter where later on, after the war in heaven took place, years and years later, a comet almost hit, or something almost hit the earth, and it says, Pastor says, all of a sudden, before something took place, Jupiter got hit again, and the scientists said, how could that be? There wasn't even anything going at it. And they're still puzzled as to how this strike took place and why. But I believe she had something schemed, and Yahweh said, now listen to what he said. This was way back in 2010. I'm in control. You better not try it. Now, is this man not before? I mean, come on. Did Yahweh not say he would foretell this? Let them foretell them, the two witnesses? Okay? All right, next slide. And Pastor says here in the second book of Israel, chapter 36, verse 80, I'm writing an article to explain this war and to go deeper into the fact that Satan is not male. Yahweh's suffering the same thing that I'm suffering now, and the same thing that many others suffer with a rebellious wife. Angry, fearful, rebellious wife. Okay, keep that in your mind. So let's look at, I want you to remember 2 Thessalonians 2, 7 and 8, where it talks about Yahweh's restraining Satan until he's made to appear in the midst, and then that lawless one will be revealed. We're going to look at that gematria right there, because it's going to reveal somebody to you, okay? And remember, we're in the midst, and that's when the revealing takes place. Strong's 4677, that's the first number, and it means obelisks, an idol, image. That's from 5324, and it means appointed or to establish, fix. Remember their calendar that they used to fix their appointed seasons according to the position of the sun in the sky, which Yahweh told them not to do. But it reveals something else as well. Can we look at the next slide? It says, these numbers reveal the so-called sacred pole set up in honor of Yahweh's consort or wife, who they named Asherah, Astarte, Easter, the queen of heaven. Yahweh warned Israel not to worship his wife. When he warned them in Deuteronomy 16, 21 and 22, he said, you must not plant a tree to be used as a sacred pole or Asherah pole for setting pagan feasts beside the altar which you shall make to Yahweh your Father. And you must also not set up a sacred pillar, image of the sun god Baal, for these Yahweh your Father hates. And you can read about this Asherah pole on page 84 and 85 of Deceptions. Continuing in this same gematria, the same number, 4677. Can I have the next slide? Greek 4677 means lily. Lily, or lilies. From 7797, which means to rejoice and be bright. Remember, that's what Hallel means. 1984 means to be bright, to shine. Okay? Lily, this is from Wikipedia. Lily, it says, is a feminine name directly derived from lily, the flower, derived from a flower that is named, the name is supposed to mean things like pure, innocent, or cute. Lily can be short for Lillian, Liliana, or Lilith. You see that? Lilith. Now, everybody should know who Lilith is because Pastor showed us in Unveiling Satan that Yahweh's wife's name was Lilith. Watch this. Let's go to the next slide. This is from the first book of Israel, chapter 5, verse 94, which ties it in with Jupiter. You see the gematria of Jupiter there, 594. That's one of Jupiter's numbers. You see how Yahweh confirms and verifies everything this man said? Every single word. Do you need to go outside of the house of Yahweh to find the answers? Outside the books of Israel or outside of anything that Pastor wrote? No. In fact, Deuteronomy 18:17 said, the nations follow after the familiar spirits, those that have familiar spirits and wizards that peep and mutter. He said, Yahweh has not appointed this to you. He said, I have sent the two witnesses for you to get your information from. Not from the gods. You're not going to find anything among the dead. The dead have nothing to offer you. Now he says in 5 verse 94, he says, you see her in verse 14. He's talking about Isaiah 34:14. The wild beasts of the desert will also meet with the wild beasts on the island and the satyr. This is a showdown, as Isaiah 14:15 says. The demons will cry to his fellow, the screech owl. Now he said they translated this screech owl. It's actually Lilith or Lucifer, okay? The first wife of Yahweh. And some Hebrew people, scholars, think that it's the wife of Adam, but there's no such record of any such thing. Screech owl, if you'll notice, is 666. That should tell you everything you need to know right there of the being that's behind this, Lilith. And I brought some information on my next slide about that lily flower. Remember the fleur de lis, or the lily flower, French for lily flower? 666, and here you see the Queen of Heaven with the fleur de lis, or the lily flower, above her head here, and all these different symbolisms. Okay, this is showing, and by the way, that's not a lily, okay? It's called a spear. Okay, it's not a flower. In fact, lily, that word in Isaiah 34:14 means to twist. It means to twist or spin or pervert. Yahshua gave you a clue. He said, "Consider the lilies of the field. They neither tend nor they neither toil nor spin." So he showed you there's a difference between them. If you'll pay attention to these words. Can I have my next slide? Now notice this. Consider what you heard this morning over here on this side from the stars of Yahweh. Listen to this. This is the second number, 4368. And it means appointed, installed, ordained, prepared. It's talking about Lucifer, Lilith, who was installed as a protectress. And notice, 4368 in Strong's Greek means a patroness, protectress, a female guardian, a woman to stand before, to preside in rank, set over others, assistant, helper, helpmate, remember? This is showing you Lilith right here. It's exposing and showing you who this lawless one, the first lawless one in the heavens. And also says, referring to a preset, well-established character which provides the needed model to direct others to positively impact them by example. And remember, she was created perfect. Okay, until iniquity was found in her. She was a perfect example. Can I have my next slide? In Yeketska 28:12 or 13, he says, "You were in the garden of Yahweh," speaking of Lilith. Jump down to verse 14, he says, "You were the guardian cherub, and I married you on the holy mountain of Yahweh. You have walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire." Now notice this guardian cherub. It's word number 792 in the Greek, and it means a star. A star. Women of Nu. You heard that this morning? The holy women of Nu. I put in women of Nu. That's what I kept hearing pastors say. So I put in women of Nu, and I got a star. A star. Remember the stars of Yahweh? It's just, to me, that's remarkable. I don't know how you just can't do backflips right now. Well, I know you're not in a Pentecostal church, so don't do it. But mentally do some flips, okay? All right. I don't want to promote any kind of rowdiness or anything. Okay, so let's look at the next slide. This July 16th war in heaven. Let's look at this first number. It means, 234 means a memorial, come to remembrance, or remembered. And remembered, Revelation 16:19 says, "And great Babylon came in remembrance before Yahweh." 234 in the Greek means pollution, defiled by idols, a polluted thing, contaminated. And look on page 234 of Unveiling Satan, and there she is, right there. Okay? The Queen of Heaven. Let's look at the next slide. 1404 is the next number. And it says, lady, queen, mistress, lord, master, conduct self arrogantly. Remember the pride that she showed? Strong's Greek 1404, a dragon, a monster, serpent. By the way, if you put in Monster Energy drink in gematria, it comes up 1404 too. I guess that's why I never drank one of those things. I don't want to. Exercising, notice, it says, exercising subtle impact and accomplishing her hellish agenda from behind the scenes. When you put that in gematria, it comes out 1054. If you remember, that's the other number of Jupiter, the divider, okay? Remember, accomplishing their agenda from behind the scenes, called the Holy See, okay? And the Freemasons, which we'll learn about more later, the priests of Jupiter. Next slide. The final number, it says 2858, and it means to set a seal, to close up, to make an end. And then 2858 in the Greek means monstrosities. It means horror, evil, atrocity, frightfulness, heinousness. And it means Leviathan. Leviathan. That's what the word monstrosity means, okay? Now, final slide. When you add up all those numbers in July 16th war, you get 4496. And it means space stationed, cast down. From 4496, to cast down, to throw down, to hurl, to throw to the ground, to cast to the ground. Remember Revelation 12:9. The great dragon was cast out, and her angels were cast out with her. I brought out in 2016 that Pastor showed that word with also means after. The demons are also cast out after her at various intervals, which we'll learn about as we go along. And at this time, my time's up. I'm about to be cast off. Hopefully I'll remain here. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to one of Yahweh's great priests, the great Kohan, Yisrayl Hawkins.
Shalom. Please be seated. Hope I don't get these pages tied up. Brother and sister, a very interesting thing came to pass today. Pastor called me to look at some verses. Turn to page 3 in your Book of Yahweh. Everything will be on page 3, except that fly. And we're going to look at Genesis 14 through 16. You don't have to leave there. If you have a Bible, it's Genesis 3, verses 14 through 16. Chapter 3, verses 14 through 16. And on the Book of Yahweh, that's page 3. Now, I'm going to read, verse 14 is going to be according to the King James Version of the Bible. And the other two verses I will read as it's currently in the Book of Yahweh. So let's start. And Father Yahweh said unto the serpent, because thou hast done this, that is, you have done this, thou art cursed above all cattle, and above every beast of the field. Upon thy belly shalt thou go, and dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life. Now, verse 15, Book of Yahweh. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. To the woman he said, your sorrow and your conception shall be greatly multiplied. In pain you shall bring forth children. You must be led by your husband, for he shall rule over you. Now they make it look like Yahweh is having a temper tantrum. But the interesting thing about this is this. When I looked at these scriptures and did the work on this, I had no idea Deacon Michael Ossoff was looking at the war in heaven, or that Kohan Ben was going to look at some parts of the war in heaven alongside of the work I'm doing on this. Because what this here you are looking at is part of one of the early battles of the war in heaven between Satan and the House of Yahweh. That's what this is all about. Now this part here, the war, the part of this battle that started when Satan conned Adam and Eve to quit following Yahweh the way that they should. But this here is what was caused because of it. We're going to read these verses now. I'm going to tell you what these words, all the translation foul-ups that were going on. The words bitterly cursed that are written in Genesis 3:14 are translated from the Hebrew word arul. This word is listed on page 40 of the 88. Whoa, let me try again. Untie that tongue now. This word is listed on page 48 of the Analytical Hebrew and Chaldee Lexicon by Benjamin Davison, which shows this word means to bring on a curse. Now, the way they read this in these scriptures, it looks like Yahweh's ready to haul off and belt everyone on the side of the head. But keep going. Pay attention, please. The word above that is written twice in Genesis 3:14 is translated from the Hebrew word ma, or that's the letter mem, a form of the Hebrew word man. This word that's not man, but man, mem nun. This word is listed on page 498 of the Analytical Hebrew and Chaldee Lexicon by Benjamin Davison, which shows this word means own. The word cattle that is written in Genesis 3:14 is translated from the Hebrew word bahama. This word is listed on page 100 of volume 2 of the Dictionary of the Classical Hebrew by David Kleins, which shows this word means from a human being and unto beast, that is, humans and beasts alike. In other words, living things. The word beast that is written in Genesis 3:14 is translated from the Hebrew word ha'it. This word is listed on page 438 of a Hebrew and Chaldee Lexicon to the Old Testament by Julius I, which shows that word means living things. The word field that is written in Genesis 3:14 is translated from the Hebrew word shadad. This word is listed on page 683 of an Hebrew and English lexicon without points by John Parkhurst, which shows this word means ground. The word upon that is written in Genesis 3:14 is translated from the Hebrew word ol. This word is listed on page 758 of a Hebrew and English lexicon of the Old Testament by Brown, Driver, and Briggs, So page 758, which shows this word means remove. The word belly, that is written in Genesis 3:14, is translated from the Hebrew word gahun. This word is listed on page 190 of Gesenius Hebrew and Chaldee Lexicon by Edward Robinson, which shows this word means to cause, a mother to bring forth. There we go. The words shalt thou eat that are written in Genesis 3:14 are translated from the Hebrew word takal. This word is listed on page 246 of volume 3 of the Dictionary of Classical Hebrew by David Klein, which this word means to destroy, so as to remove from the world. The word life that is written in Genesis 3:14 is translated from the Hebrew word haik. This word is listed on page 204 of volume 1 of the Dictionary of the Classical Hebrew by David Klein, which shows this word means to live, to remain alive. Okay, it's page 204. That should be volume 3. There's a typo, a typographical error there. The words I will put that are written in Genesis 3:15 are translated from the Hebrew word ashit. The Lingua Sacra by David Levi, volume 3, page 651 in PDF shows this word means that have set themselves against the roundabout, that fought against me. The word enmity that is written in Genesis 3:15 is translated from the Hebrew word ayaba. There you go. This word is listed on page 70 of a Hebrew and Chaldee lexicon to the Old Testament by Julius First, so this word means enemy, hater, despiser. This despiser and blasphemer of Yahweh, to a single enemy, collectively to a hostile people. The word woman that is written in Genesis 3:15 is translated from the Hebrew word asha. The Hebrew and Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament by Coelho and Baumgartner, volume 1, page 43, and Revelation 12, verse 1, letting Scripture interpret Scripture, shows this word means people, a house, Yahweh, distinguished people. The word bruise that is written in Genesis 3:15 is translated from the Hebrew word shufak. This word is listed on page 1430 of a Hebrew and Chaldee lexicon to the Old Testament by Julius First. This shows this word means to lavish the shame. In other words, to really pour it out. The word head that is written in Genesis 3:15 is translated from the Hebrew word dorash. This word is listed on page 1271 of a Hebrew and Chaldee lexicon to the Old Testament by Julius First, which shows this word means to conquer. The word bruise that is written in Genesis 3:15 is translated from the Hebrew word tashufanu. This word is listed on page 1433 of a Hebrew and Chaldee lexicon to the Old Testament that shows this word means sly or prudent one. The word heel that is written in Genesis 3:15 is translated from the Hebrew word okab. This word is listed on page 1084 of a Hebrew and Chaldee lexicon to the Old Testament by Julius First. So this word means behind, at the back. The words pain and sorrow that are written in Genesis 3:16 are translated from and traced back to the Hebrew word otsab. The Dictionary of Classical Hebrew by David Klein, volume 2, pages 386, 412, and volume 6, page 526, along with Proverb 22:6 and Matthew 5:4-8, letting Scripture interpret Scripture, shows this word means in English to toil, to work, at hard labor, and in Hebrew, dabar, the Hebrew word that means speak, word of Yahweh, teacher of righteousness, teacher of the word of Yahweh, counsel, righteousness, the law, prophecy, wisdom, the words of the prophet, the words of truth, the words of peace, righteousness, book of Yahweh, way of Yahweh, commandment, judgment, deliverance from evil, the promise of Yahweh, train up a child in the way it should go, and when it grows old it will not depart from it, and become perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. Okay. The word led that is written in Genesis 3:16 is translated from the Hebrew word yamashal. This word is listed on page 460 of volume 2 of Gesenius Hebrew and Chaldee lexicon by Christopher Leo, and with page 1585 Webster's New 20th Century Dictionary. It shows this word means to lovingly guide, not glide, guide, G-U-I-D-E. Get tongue stuck. So this is what the word of Yahweh is saying. So Yahweh said to the servant, because you have done this, you have brought a curse on all, both man and beast, and on all flesh on the ground. Your ability to bring forth life from the dust will be taken away, and your eternal life will be taken away because of what you have done. Remember? cause and effect. For every action, there's an opposite and equal reaction. You sin, you die. You walk in the ways of Yahweh, you live. Remember that. For you are an enemy of Yahweh, who with your followers have set yourselves to fight against me. The war in heaven, not a war of guns and bombs, but a war of words. Has Yahweh told you that really? For you are an enemy of Yahweh with your followers. For you have set yourselves to fight against me, causing enmity between you and my people. The house of Yahweh, between your seed and their seed. They shall overcome you by bringing you and your followers to utter and everlasting shame, while you continue to do deceitful things behind their backs. Sneaky. To the woman he said, you must always work to teach your children all my words, the words of the law and my prophets. This is the way they should go, that they may become perfect as Yahweh is perfect. So when they get older, they will not depart from it, and they may live. As for you, your desire must be for your husband, for he is to be your guide. Write in the notes on this. Read Ephesians chapter 5. Read Colossians chapter 3. Read 1 Kepha chapter 3. It tells you, husbands, love your wives. It says in one place in King James that she's a weaker vessel. That doesn't mean that. In other words, if she's a righteous woman, she is submissive to Yahweh and to her husband. It means love your wives, because what is the second greatest commandment in the law? Is your wife not your neighbor, as well as your brothers and sisters, your children, everybody? Love one another as Yahweh loves you. That's what it's all about. Because, brothers and sisters, your fathers and mothers are your guide. Sisters who are married, your husbands are your guide. And brothers, if you're their guides, love them and treat them right. Teach them the ways of Yahweh and be kind unto them. That's what it's all about. That is what Satan didn't do, and that's why the war started. But this is the final result of one of these battles in that war. And as usual, Satan lost. And the house of Yahweh won. May Yahweh bless your understanding. And I turn these services back over, well, not back over, but turn the service over to the great Kohan Ilya Hawkins.
Please be seated. The peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. Now in the news, it's very important. In the first 3 articles that come out, it's going to show about the shootings taking place in Chicago at an all-time high. It's going to show disease running rampant through Los Angeles due to trash and just degradation of the human race or of mankind. And then you're going to see in Kenya, where a river that used to flow through Nairobi, they used to fish in, how it's completely full of trash. And when they went to clean it out, they're finding dead bodies one after another. Now, the thing you have to realize in this is that man is doing this. This is done by choices. This is done by a neglect in keeping the law of Yahweh. But also realize when you see the filth in these rivers and the filth on the street, keep in mind that's what the inside of these bodies look like too, of the people that are out there that aren't keeping the law, that aren't cleansing themselves. It's that filthy, and a proper decision can't be made in that kind of an environment. So keep that in mind, because as we go through that, then you'll see the infamous Bilderberg group who met this week. And the reason we want to show this is because Mike Pompeo and Jared Kushner were also there, and it dealt with economics. And if you remember, the economics is what Jared Kushner is pushing for the Palestinians with this, as Mahmoud Abbas calls it, a bribe, offering billions of dollars for a signing of a peace treaty. And keep in mind, Mahmoud Abbas is one person. He's a leader of Palestine, but there's a lot of pressure coming from people that want that money. They want the money. They want to be able to put it into their economy, and they want relief because they know without it they're just going to see this continual war. And it's a false hope they're giving through this peace treaty, but it still shows they're going to do it. With that taking place also, the trade wars in China. If you don't remember that, Research Israel says, and you'll see where Pastor said these wars are going to start. Also, trade wars are going to be taking place at this very time. And he clearly shows that in the books of Yisrael. And these trade wars, watch what Vladimir Putin says, the president of Russia. He comes right out and says it without saying it. But we need to get rid of the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency. He's talking about the petrodollar. We need to bypass that. We need to get around that, and we need to create something that's going to benefit everyone instead of this tyranny. And he refers to the United States controlling everyone with this dollar through sanctions. If you don't listen to this beast, as Revelation 13 says, you can't buy, sell, nor trade. And whatever you do, write down Revelation 6:6 and repeat this to yourself continually. You'll see where it was reported, RT reports it, the smell of freedom is known as OIL, oil. If you want freedom, you agree with the oil and the system that it's used to do so. And you see that in Venezuela also. But China and Russia coming out showing how they're joining together, just as Pastor's been bringing for all these years. Malachi Martin spoke about this, joining together to combat a power, a nation that is sanctioning everyone. So keep all these things in mind, and remember the filth that's in the bodies of the people making the decisions too. They're not going to make a common sense decision until they come to this house and get guidance from those that are training under the one sent. Then sensible decisions can be made. But then Abbas, in the two-state solution, he had a reply back for President Trump where he could take his plan, and it'll say in the news where he said. But of course, he's frustrated by the dealing that's taking place, all these things going behind the scenes. But also to show the importance of this and to show how the time period is close, you're going to see where Congress, Democrat senators and congressmen are now pushing in D.C. right now, on Capitol Hill, for a two-state solution to be openly spoken about. So all of these things pastors brought, and we're seeing it all come together at this time and this age where you see disease at an all-time high, you see starvation, earthquake in place after place. We're in the midst of a 7-year agreement, as the Great Kahan brought out, but we're soon to see this last 3.5 years start with this 7-year plan coming into a completion. At this time, if we could please go ahead and play the news.
Pay close attention. The news you're about to see is fulfilling Bible prophecy.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news that relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yisrayl Hawkins. Well, a couple meetings we're going to talk about today in the news, Katan. One, the St. Petersburg Forum, where President Putin and President Xi Jinping of China got together as they strengthen their relations, talk about some of the energy deals that they have coming up. And we also have a Bilderberg meeting, which is a meeting of some of the wealthiest and powerful people. So we'll have those, actually Larry's covering that story and have those details for us. And also, Los Angeles, California is facing a homeless crisis that is turning into a public health crisis as all those people not having clean water, and there's some outbreaks of disease, and we'll have those details. So these stories and more, but first, the streets of Chicago had seen less violence over the winter months, but now as temperatures start rising in America's third largest city, so too does the death toll. So far, the warmest weekend of 2019 has also been the deadliest, with over 50 people shot. Now, according to police, some of the conflicts are new, but some are old grudges frozen over the winter months, now thawed out.
Well, Chicago's chief of police, Eddie Johnson, reported on the weekend's sad turn of events, saying, "Unfortunately, over the past 72 hours in Chicago, we saw a despicable level of violence with 52 shot and 10 killed. Currently, more people are killed in Chicago each year than in New York and Los Angeles, the two largest cities in America combined."
Well, Chicago's new mayor, Lori Lightfoot, has vowed to hold police accountable for bringing the gun violence under control. Now, this will not be easy, as she herself has told reporters, saying, I'm upset as a human being that we've had so many people shot. Now, this is not a law enforcement only problem, and they're not going to solve it entirely, but I want to make sure that they are doing everything they can to be far more proactive and recede the violence.
However, Police Chief Johnson blames the local justice system for failing to keep known gunmen behind bars. Johnson said, "We know who a lot of these people are, and how do we know that? Because we keep arresting them over and over again. And it's just a vicious cycle, leaving the police feeling like their efforts are in vain."
Well, this weekend, half of the shooting victims were from the west side. People in the area believe the unsafe conditions stem back to the 1968 riots, when much of that part of the city was burned.
Well, while Los Angeles is not suffering from the highest rate of gun violence in the nation, they are experiencing one of the highest homeless crisis. Well, in an effort to turn things around, LA has more than $1 billion set aside to make changes.
Well, the most recent numbers show a 12% increase in homelessness in Los Angeles County to almost 59,000 people. Now, in the city of Los Angeles alone, there has been a 16% increase, with the majority of those left homeless being under the age of 25 or over the age of 65. Now, with the new surge comes worries of new health concerns as well.
Now, that's almost half the population of Abelin right there that they have in Los Angeles alone that are actually homeless. That's a large number of people. Well, some officials are blaming the problem partly on a housing shortage, which has caused rent prices to be inflated, leaving many unable to pay and forcing them out into the streets. It is estimated that 75% of LA's homeless population lives in the elements and with no clean water or facilities to keep clean. Experts say the environment has become a breeding ground for diseases which can be spread.
Well, Skid Row, the most famous and one of the largest communities of homeless people in Los Angeles, stretches for nearly 50 blocks and accounts for 4,200 homeless people. Now, of course, the homeless are worried about getting sick, but they aren't the only ones. Now, one police station in the heart of Skid Row recently had an officer diagnosed with typhoid fever, and at least 5 other officers were experiencing similar symptoms. Now, according to the CDC, typhoid fever is extremely rare in the United States. It can be spread through the contamination of contaminated food, water, or by close contact with someone who is infected.
Yeah, you don't hear much of typhoid here in the United States. You hear of it more in other countries that have those problems with, waters not being clean and they're living in unsanitary conditions. Well, another cause for concern would be the large buildup of trash that surround homeless areas and are very inviting to rats. The rats often carry fleas, which in 2018 caused an outbreak of typhus, and in 2017 there was a hepatitis A outbreak as well. All of this has local police even more worried about going to work.
Well, in a statement to Russia Today by the union representing the LA officers, they said, "At this point, we don't care who is at fault. We just want these toxic work sites cleaned and sanitized." Now, officers worry enough about being shot or injured policing the streets of Los Angeles. They shouldn't also have to worry about being infected with diseases that they can take home to their families simply by showing up to work.
Yeah,
it's understandable.
Kind of hard to defend yourself against something that you can't see. Well, 3 years ago, LA voters approved a $1.2 billion housing bond to help fix the homeless crisis. And officials say the money will go to building 5,000 new housing units over the next 10 years, but there has been little progress to this point.
Well, looking now at another health crisis, what once was a beautiful waterway in the heart of Kenya's capital now looks like a landfill. People used to catch fish and even draw water for washing clothes, but now only garbage, waste, and even worse are found in and around the river. Officials are blaming the environmental catastrophe on economic growth and industrialization with no regulations.
Veska Kangogo, a Nairobi County environment executive, said Nairobi County has one of the largest populations in Africa. We have 6 million people at night and 8 million people in Nairobi during the day. The pressure of urbanization and growth in the economy of Nairobi has led to activities that have continually led to pollution of our environment, of chemicals and industrial waste that have been dumped here.
Well, the Yangon River is only one of Kenya's waterways that is being choked by pollution. The pollution, in turn, is creating waterborne illnesses like the recent outbreak of cholera. It has also hurt the fishing industry as well as tourism to the country.
In hopes of making change, the Nairobi government is funding a project to clean up the Yangon River called the Regeneration Program. But the task is daunting, to say the least. The government claims they are cracking down on industries causing the chemical and other waste sources of pollution. And over the past month, the National Environment Agent or Management Authority has closed over 20 factories for dumping untreated waste into the Nairobi River.
Well, those cleaning the waterways say the waste byproducts from factories is not the only kind of pollution they are dealing with. One volunteer from the project says it's not just normal waste that we have to deal with. We discover animal carcasses and human remains. Now, recently, he said, we discovered 6 bodies that were dumped in this river.
Wow. Well, in total, officials for Nairobi County report 14 bodies have been found in the river, as well as human feces and medical waste from illegal clinics. Now, the Nairobi government estimates spending up to $3 million for the current regeneration project. The greater outcome they are hoping for through it is to increase awareness of the harmful effects polluted and what the waterways has on society. So those polluted waterways are greatly affecting society in a way that, like what you said at the very beginning there, people can't even drink that water, they can't do laundry, and it's affecting the fishing community, which people thrive on for their daily needs.
Right. What's amazing is when you see some of these pictures, you see the tremendous amount of trash that they're scooping out of there. And to think, as the one representative said, that used to be where somebody could go fishing and even get water to wash their clothes. It's amazing how far downhill it's gone.
Yeah, and it looks like they're barely making a dent in it, as the workers are there cleaning. But we know that, the effort starts with the first step. But it seems like the representative said that it's a daunting task.
Well, the 67th Bilderberg meeting is taking place this year in Switzerland. Some of those in attendance are going to be White House Senior Advisor Jared Kushner and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Larry McGee has been covering these details. Larry, who else is going to be in attendance here at the Bilderberg meeting, and what exactly is the goal that these people that come together, which are very well known to be some of the richest and powerful people in the world, what is the goal at this meeting?
It is very rare for the public to be aware of one of the secret assemblies where the representatives for the world's leading powers come together to plot. The Bilderberg Group is an exception, however. Not only are many people aware of it, the media even reports on it. The participants for the cabal's 67th session gathered in Switzerland recently with the usual array of power players spanning everything from finance to defense and technology. Advisor Kushner and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo were also on hand to lend their presence among the world's most influential. While there is reported to be a general assembly wherein all participants attend, insiders say the real business takes place inside meetings. The gathering of the infamous order takes place just weeks before the meeting of the G20. The assemblage is viewed by many analysts and commentators as a mecca of global policy. There are expectations held by some that the members of the Bilderberg Group might persuade the U.S. to abandon its counterproductive money war with Beijing. China's latest round of retaliatory tariffs came into effect this week in the form of an import tax of 25% on over 5,000 U.S. items. This follows American tariffs on over $200 billion worth of Chinese products imposed recently, along with the move of banning Chinese tech giant Huawei and pressuring U.S. allies to follow suit. And punching back, Beijing is said to be composing a roster of U.S. companies that it will no longer play with as well. One of the sectors hard hit by the back and forth between Beijing and Washington is America's agricultural sphere to help offset the hardship they have had to endure President Trump is promising subsidies. China is America's largest market for produce, and so Chinese analysts say that while the current administration might indeed be able to subsidize American farmers in the short run, in the long term, the government subsidizing U.S. growers to compensate for the loss of Asian markets will prove unsuccessful. International and independent specialist on China, Andrew Luing, added further that the current battle between Beijing and Washington is more than just economic. Luang says the real battle is for regional dominance in the Asia Pacific, and he believes that before it's over, many other nations will be caught up in the tussle. Some nations suspect as much and are making moves to try and prepare for it. Taiwan, the American ally that China considers a breakaway renegade, is in the process of closing a $2 billion arms deal with the U.S. The agreement is reported to be for 108 M1 Abrams tanks, and in a separate deal, the small nation is also seeking to acquire American F-16 fighter jets. China, of course, is in strong disagreement with the proposition. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Jing Xuan gave a statement saying that China firmly opposes the U.S. arms sales to Taiwan. This position, he said, has been consistent and clear. The spokesperson says that China urges the U.S. to fully understand the sensitivity and serious harm of its arms sales to Taiwan and to abide by the One China principle in the 3 joint U.S.-China communiques. Beijing would like for the U.S. to sever all military ties with the island that it has already reportedly sold $15 billion worth of military hardware to date. Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen says she will not embrace the One China principle and stated that because of the Taiwan Relations Act, the U.S. has played a crucial role to help Taiwan reject coercion. The move is reported to further heighten tensions between China and the U.S. and drive an even bigger wedge between the two powers. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan Jeff, back to you.
Well, you take into consideration not only the things that were discussed at the Bilderberg meeting, but also the tensions that are building between Taiwan and China, and then China and the United States. And of course, as we know, the China-Russia relations are growing stronger. Russia is at odds with the United States, as the United States is with Russia as well. So we see, tensions building in that area, as well as, the exercise in the Strait of Taiwan over there that just recently took place. We're not moving any closer to steps of peace, but instead steps for war, closer to war.
And even, Katan, we're seeing that some of these smaller countries want to purchase what they can as far as arms, be it the tanks, the planes, anti-missile defense systems, to protect their own country, knowing that, look, we're facing a war. It's going to be coming sooner or later. So
so they're allying themselves with bigger nations to make sure that, like you said, they have a defense system in place to protect their country. Well, the U.S. is setting records for natural gas production, and the U.S. Secretary for Fossil Energy, Stephen Winberg, said, "I am pleased that the Department of Energy is doing what it can to promote an efficient regulatory system that allows for molecules of freedom to be exported to the world." U.S. Secretary of Energy Rick Perry said 75 years after liberating Europe from the Nazi Germany occupation, the United States is again delivering a form of freedom to the European continent.
Well, many are saying that the product being withdrawn from the shale is freedom, with a statement from the Department of Energy saying increasing export capacity is critical to spreading freedom gas throughout the world by giving America's allies a diverse and affordable source of clean energy.
Well, the 3-day St. Petersburg Economic Forum recently ended, where President Xi Jinping met with Russian President Vladimir Putin to discuss the relationship between China and Russia and the rest of the world. Well, currently, the relationship between China and Russia is at a historic high since the 1950s, and trade has reached a new high at $100 billion, while at the same time both countries are at odds with the United States. President Putin's language was the strongest on the matter regarding the U.S., and this is what he had to say.
President Putin said, U.S. efforts to dominate the world markets is a recipe for conflicts and wars. Now, the role of the U.S. dollar has to be revisited. It used to be the world's reserve currency, but now it's being used as a tool issuing countries used to pressure the rest of the world. I think that is the error in financial and political authorities because trust in the U.S. dollar is falling.
Yeah, people are losing hope and trust, like President Putin said, in the U.S. petrodollar. They see it has not as much value as it once did when it was at least backed by gold. Yeah. Well, President Xi said that competition is not the answer, and we need to work together to create sustainable and reliable sources of energy for everyone. He continued by saying that we're in for a long and difficult journey to energy security. Russia and China ought to act together and develop multilateral cooperation, play a constructive role in the system of global energy resource management, and make a bigger contribution to the global energy development.
Well, Russia's foreign minister spokeswoman Maria Zakharova spoke about the role of the U.S. foreign policy while attending the St. Petersburg Forum. Now, she said the U.S. government is turning into something they were once struggling with. They were supporting people of goodwill. They were supporting people of freedom. They were a country, a democracy based on freedom, and now it's like they're canceling their own ideology.
Jared Kushner met with Jordanian officials accompanied by the Middle East envoy. Now, the White House said that the trip was the first leg of a Middle Eastern region visit that is set to include Israel and Morocco in efforts to shore up support for the soon-to-be unveiled U.S. peace initiative. Well, the first phase of Donald Trump's deal of the century, specifically the economic part of it, will be presented in Bahrain, scheduled for the 25th and 26th of June.
Well, the Palestinian leadership in Ramallah officially announced that it will not attend the meeting in Bahrain. Mahmoud Abbas said the solution to the Palestinian situation must begin with a political solution and not an economic one, and the American peace plan and the economic conference will go to hell. Arab leaders have announced to hold two separate meetings of their own in the Saudi city of Mecca to appease the Palestinians.
Well, a group of senior Democratic senators introduced a draft resolution declaring U.S. support for the two-state solution. The issue with Israel annexation was brought up by the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who tried to convince right-wing voters to vote for his ruling Likud party. The resolution aims to prohibit Israeli annexation. Well, Senator Feinstein said that a two-state solution is the only way for Israel to retain its identity as both a Jewish and a democratic state, and to recognize the Palestinian right to self-determination. And we, of course, we do know that the senators are calling for this. Many other people have called for this. The deal of the century and some of the things that Jared Kushner have presented in the last few months, because their secretive deal has, kind of made the public to believe that that's not the direction that they're wanting to go. Instead, they're wanting to offer economic incentives for the Palestinians. The Palestinians say, we're not interested in improving our current conditions. We want our own state. We want autonomy. We want to be our own nation. Don't just throw money at us. And of course, you can see Abbas fighting back at that, protesting this upcoming meeting that's going to be taking place in Bahrain, saying that, that plan's not going to work. While on the same plan, the other Arab states are trying to get them on board with this, because there is a lot of money, billions and billions of dollars are kind of being thrown in that Middle Eastern region to get everybody on the same page so that this deal can go through.
Right, but despite Mahmoud Abbas adamantly saying, that meeting he wants nothing to do with and he doesn't want their economic benefits that they're offering, it may be that the other political leaders there will push him to accept it, because they are hurting so bad in their current situation. So, he is pretty opposed to it. But, when you start seeing those dollar signs and thinking about what they could do to help improve the situation of the Palestinian people, it may be something that they would consider the money that is being offered them. So it's really going to be interesting just to see. And of course, that meeting dealing with the financial end of the peace plan, been set up for quite some time in Bahrain. So we'll see what comes out of that, and then really what the next step is going to be.
Right. Well, like we've mentioned before, Yisrayl Hawkins, the House of Yahweh, has brought out detailed events concerning this time period, even down to the details of the signing of the 7-year peace agreement, which was signed back in September of 1993, 13th, I believe, of 1993, went into effect a month later in October, and how that was going to take place and build up to this time period that we're in now. And he actually brought out in those books, Mark of the Beast, Volume 1 and 2, Birth of the Nuclear Baby, and some of the other publications that these things were going to go through in this time period, and they're going to have a plan that will involve both the Israelis and the Palestinians in order to bring about what seems like it would be peace, but we know that in the end it's going to lead to all-out nuclear war and destruction. And of course, that's what the nations are preparing for at this time, to get ready for nuclear war, not just conventional war. But if you would like to learn more about the prophecies written in your scriptures, your Holy Bible, and what they say for this time period known as the last days, contact the House of Yahweh. And when you do, don't forget to request your free copy of the Prophetic Word magazine and the monthly newsletter. Here's how.
Well, to contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites, Yahweh.com, YisraelHawkins.com, or Yahweh'sBranch.com. If you'd like, you could visit our website by going to YPNnews.com. If you would like to email the House of Yahweh, you can do so by emailing info@Yahweh.com. And the international calls, you can call the number that's on your screen now. And if you have not yet checked out the 2 Bible Help programs that are on the market today, they're absolutely free. The Yisrael Says program and the Ask Yisrael program, you can do so by going to YisraelSays.com and AskYisrael.com.
Well, don't go anywhere. Up next, Yisrayl Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
Thank you for watching.
This time, if everybody would please stand, I'd like to introduce the one that told them all of these things before they actually brought it to pass. The greatest teacher in the world, the great Kahan Yisrayl Hawkins.
Oh, wow. Oh, man. Father, you see that? Oh, you're beautiful. Praise Yahweh. Praise Yahweh. Get me seated. What a beautiful day. May the peace, the peace of Yahweh will be with each and every one of you. It's hard to get rid of that goddess name. I haven't got the Pope to change it yet either. He will, though. The way things are going, they're going to have to shut that Vatican down. It's already on the way. So the House of Yahweh is going up, and they're going down. I did say welcome home, I hope. This right here is a number that's the only one I come up with as one smaller than that one. Now this was only a few months ago, and I say that, and then somebody tells me, hey, Israel, that was 2 years ago, but I don't think so. But anyway, if you remember the last one, I couldn't find the last one. The last two, house cleaners do that, But this one right here is today. It's up to date. I'm going to cover this part right here where you can't see it right now. Can you see that? Now they say this just doesn't occur, that many people, but Yahweh can do anything He wants to, and He's doing it, and He broadcasts it. Now watch. I'm gonna move my fingers down. You see that number? 777. Now this 777, that's 777,000 people that saw this. All 256,000 watched the whole show. That is the righteous women of old. They're tuning in there to watch. The righteous women of new, holy women of new. The comments was, I love you, I love you, I love you, praise Yahweh, praise Yahweh, praise Yahweh. A lot of praises. The Pope, I almost hate to read this to you, but the United Nations heavily criticized the Vatican on Wednesday for what it said was a systematic adoption of policies allowing priests to rape and sexually abuse tens of thousands of children. A religion is supposed to be teaching the people. And here's politics, that's trying to teach the Pope and the Vatican, that what you're doing is wrong. It's just backwards. The Vatican is teaching everything evil, and the people are seeing it, and then they come out, Pope Francis calls for a one-world government with him as the head, And of course, this is the government of the Nimrod system, a government of force, because no one would fall in unity with such a character as that, such a religion, an evil religion where everything righteous is discarded. Catholic Church spent $10.6 million to lobby against legislation that would benefit victims of child sex abuse. A new report released Tuesday reveals that over the past 8 years, the Catholic Church has spent this much in the northeastern United States. In the northeastern United States, to fight legislation that would help the victims, that they're raping and even murder. Now, the news there you saw is showing exactly what the prophecies show. Iran could have a functioning atomic bomb in 6 to 8 months, according to a former head of security at the International Atomic Energy Agency. And that's all the world has their mind on right now. This is coming, of course, from their teaching that they get in the Nimrod system. The academies. India vows to go ahead with S-400 contract despite U.S. sanctions. They're wanting to be able to hold their own in case of a battle. Don't lose their whole country like some of the others have already. U.S. President Donald Trump on Thursday threatened to impose another round of tariffs on $300 billion worth of Chinese goods. Well, we've got a different story in the House of Yahweh. Now, I left off last week was talking about the holy women of Nu. Of course, we read when you get here to the feast, if you would try to read everything, read every sign. Start reading from the time you hit Abel Way. That is Abel Way. Abel Way. Read the signs, and then read everything you get when you get here. Everywhere you look, there's something to read. If you notice, this can be a great learning experience with, while you're here these 3 days. We ended with this women last week. They're learning to get back what Hillel and Eve cast away. Now that's what we're doing in the last days, and this is what the Scripture shows in detail. I can't cover the book of Hannah, but in this time period. But I asked you to look at it. You probably didn't get much out of it, the way it's written, but I'm telling you, it's a wealth of information. It tells you what Satan, what Hillel, the wife of Yahweh. If you're not familiar with that, please get the book, or you don't have to buy the book. You can read it online free. It's best to get the book so you can mark it and be able to teach what you learn. And that's what marking books are for. That's what books are for. I think, mark it so you can find what you want and teach it quickly. The Genesis 3 in verse 14, we get a skimpy view of that, and the way the Scriptures are written here a little and there a little. You have to know the Book of Yahweh to see what they threw away and what Yahweh is telling you for your sake that you can get back. Well, of course, we've brought you back to this point. Got a ways to go here, but if I judged you right now, which Yahshua is doing, I would say that you're ready, because you've set your mind to do this. You're not looking back. You're not fearing. You're standing strong with the work of Yahweh. Look at turn there to chapter 3 and look at verse 14. That's where we left off last Sabbath. He said, "So Yahweh said to the serpent, because you have done this." If you picture Hillel and the setup she had, Jupiter, it said you could put, well, you get several, but and I took a lengthy course of in astronomy to get some answers, and I got more questions. and I told the teacher one day, I think I'll go back to the Scriptures. They're giving me more answers than I'm getting, in the school. All it is, we're guesswork here. And he says, you're right. He told me I was right in this, but he says, I established you. Well, Jupiter, they say, will hold about 1,000 Earths. One said 10,000 Earths, but 1,000 planets the size of Earth. That's a big place. And this was Hillel's setup, and she had all kinds of servants. working with her, and some of them left with her. Others are going now, as it was brought out with the gematria, which backed up everything we wrote there. But if you look at that word there, he says, so Yahweh said to the serpent, because you have done this, you are bitterly cursed yourself. You cursed yourself. You took all this away from yourself here that I set you up with. Not only this great kingdom that you had and the leadership that you had inside that kingdom, it would take a long time to ever outgrow that thing as big as it is, but she cursed herself. You see that word established? That established there? I established you over the living things, over all living things. I established you, Yahweh said. And I established you over all flesh on the ground. But your ability now to bring forth life from the dust will be taken away. You've lost it. You threw it away. It will no longer serve you. The things you have done here, the microorganisms that form huge kingdoms, will no longer work for you. They'll no longer serve you. You can't call your sheep anymore. They won't recognize your call. This is the way Yeshua put it. You will go to your judgment. They put punishment there, but it's not punishment. You're judged. I'm giving you your judgment right now, Yahweh is saying. You will be destroyed. You just set up your death sentence right here when you did this. Your own death sentence. Because that's what keeps you alive. What I set up and established with you is actually what would keep you alive. If you hold your place right there and look at that word again, established, okay? Established. I established you. You got that? Now hold your place and turn over to Micaiah. Micaiah 4. Now, in the last days, if you probably got it, I see smiles coming on your face. In the last days, Yahweh, they threw it away. The tree of life. The tree of life they rejected when they brought these sins into living. The microorganisms are not tuned to work in this kind of conditions. The microorganisms are crying out, we can't handle this. Right here on earth, we can't handle what's taking place. We can't guard your life anymore. This is what we see in the scriptures already. A flood has got to come. So in the last days, Yahweh says, it's been gone, the tree of life, all this time. No, it wasn't brought back during Yeshua's time. It's being brought back in his time of being high priest over the house of Yahweh. But not in, praise Yahweh. But it wasn't brought back by the disciples. They laid a foundation for the house of Yahweh. That's you. The donkeys, that's going to be covered too next tomorrow. The donkeys. And the donkeys that we have in training today, got their foundation from what the work that Yeshua did to bring forth this work in the last days. This work of establishing. I established you, he says in Genesis 3:14. So here he says, now in the last days, I'll establish a group of people. His house established. He set her up. This word established here in Genesis 3:14, he set her up with a planet 1,000 times bigger than Earth. You could put a store inside that place. He established her, but he established her with ability. The scripture shows about 6,000 years he spent establishing this woman and probably some sons, and they left their first estate. This was no surprise, and of course Yahweh had dealt with this thing for years, but he had to have this in order to establish you. And then he says, I'm going to lay you out before heaven and earth so the heavens can see this. I'm going to tell them everything I'm going to do, how I'm going to bring it about, and stop all your wars. Well, that's just the one thing you're going to stop. Sickness and disease, you know, we're suffering like 1 million cases a day now of STDs. 365 days a year. 1 million a day. That's a lot of million cases. And from those are multiplying. Now that's what Yeshua said you was going to see in this time period right now. He foretold it before it ever took place. And these microorganisms that's causing diseases in men are also causing diseases in the microorganism kingdoms that govern the earth, that are set to help man, work for man, to work for Hillel, work for her sons, and they discarded them. That is, they showed them that they weren't loyal to them, and they actually hurt them, brought harm to the microorganisms where they can't protect and do their job. So as a result of that comes the death. Well, in the last days now, we see the tree of life again. And he says, I will establish you. Yahweh will be, the house of Yahweh will be established. Now, if you put that in Satan's place, Hillel's the wife of Yahweh. If you put that in the terms of her establishment, you'll see what you're going to be put over right there. You see that? Beautiful, huh? Well, back to, praise Yahweh. Back to Genesis 3 now. So Yahweh said to the serpent, because you have done this, you will be bitterly cursed. I established you over all living things. That's what you're training for now. How does the holy women of old fit into that? Oh boy, Hannah, you're a beautiful woman. I'll get to it. You might be pondering this. I can't bring it. I might bring it by tabernacles, maybe, but I can tell you some things to look for. If you read it, probably all you got was that Peninnah had a lot of children. Eli the priest did too. Hannah had no children, and she prayed for a child. And that's about it, right? Why was she wanting a child anyway? Why was she so eager to have a child? Hannah wasn't tore up because she didn't have any children. If anyone else had had a child at that time that was fit for bringing forth the Savior, but she did know the Scriptures, and she knew them well. And she knew that the Savior was going to come forth. You know where this was? Where it was taking place? Did you get that? Right inside the house of Yahweh. Oh boy. Shiloh, remember? Well, let me turn. I'm running out of time, I know, but look at Samuel. Turn over to Samuel. This was the house of Yahweh. Remember, Abel was righteous. He taught righteousness. Eve was righteous at one time. Eve was a very righteous woman at one time. There's no telling how much work that woman did in bringing forth before she got deceived into, by her own teacher now, by her own teacher and supporter. She got deceived. And she didn't resist. You've got to bring in these other cases too. Here's Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then you have one man, Yosef, out of 12. And he was put down in Egypt. They're all taken to Egypt. Now one man, they showed, was fit to bring forth there, Yosef. And the queen, the Pharaoh's wife, this puts you up in Bill Clinton White House. Now, this is what you're seeing now. This puts you up in the Pope, the Vatican, raping babies. Some of the most evil things they're doing in the Vatican. And they want to be rulers of the world where they can't be prosecuted for what they do. Well, Yosef, how did he prove himself? She actually tore his clothes off of him. And he wouldn't give in. He wouldn't give in to what? Fornication and adultery. You know how many years we've fought to get it out of the house? Well, right here in 1 Samuel, in 1 Samuel, you'll see this is the house of Yahweh. These are the priests of Yahweh. What was Peninnah's children doing? Yes, it would have tore my heart out too, to have seen this mess going on in the house of Yahweh. And Hannah could see it. And her whole life was a bitter mess because of what she saw. And no hope. She saw no hope of bringing forth a Savior from this mess right here that you read over. I'm not going to read it, but you can read it. Chapter 2, verse 22. Read it, everybody, read it. Let it set in your mind. See what a mess it was. Look at Jeremiah 23. Jeremiah 23. Now, this comes down to just 600 years before Yeshua. And Hannah was looking in advance to somebody that would bring forth righteousness and a righteous person to pay for sins. If that prophecy wasn't fulfilled, there would be no house of Yahweh established in these last days. But it was fulfilled. And Yahshua is the high priest over this house. Jeremiah 23. Now here you see the great gathering is taking place right now. You see why there's so many people turning to this broadcast and seeing what Christianity is hiding from. Yes, they hide from the prophecies. They want to bring forth evil Santa Clauses, tell lies to their children, Easter bunnies laying eggs. It's just one big lie, one big pot of lies, one big pot of witches' brew that they're all 4,199 religions are bringing forth. Well, Yahweh says here he's going to have a work, but I will gather the remnant of my flock, and it's going to be the greatest gathering that's ever taken place. And we're it. It's already started. It's right in front of your eyes. You should be able to see it taking place. Praise Yahweh. Now look on down to what Jeremiah saw and what he was fighting against. What we started fighting against years ago, to bring righteousness, a group of people, women and men, who would resist fornication, adultery, bestiality, sodomy, all the things that the Vatican is for. And Yahweh has done it. He's done it. And we got righteous teachers, holy women of new, which you're going to see more of that. People started calling me and saying, "Did you run this through the gematria or something?" And I said, No, not me. But we're saying we're backed up with it. But this thing that you're seeing right here in Jeremiah's time, if you look on down there to verse 11, verse 10, for the land is full of adulterers. It was in Egypt. That's the Catholic religion. The Coptic Catholics of Egypt. Yosef didn't give in to it. They were his teachers, but he didn't give in to it. Yes, they had, Abel was killed. No one notices when the righteous is taken away, Yahweh says. They don't notice the evil coming in. And that's what took place in a very short time. The same evil that took place before the flood started taking place after the flood. And this has come down to Jeremiah here. And he says, the land, the whole land, this is the land that they came in to take over, that Yahweh promised them, where you'd have righteousness if you will keep my laws. The holy women of Nu are keeping his laws. The holy men of Nu are keeping his laws. Look at verse 11. For both prophet and priest are profane. Even in my own house I have found their wickedness. And he goes on to show that they're all worshiping the Lord in verse 13. Then in verse 20, 25 and 26 and 27, he said, they caused my people to forget my name for Baal. Yahshua said, I showed the 12 your name. Why on earth would he have to show the 12 his name at a late date like that? Why wouldn't they know that in Galilee? That's where he picked up his 12. They'd all forgotten. They caused them to forget. And they were going to Jerusalem to keep the feast. Our father said And these mountains is the place we should worship. Remember? But now they say it's Jerusalem is the place we should worship. Well, in Jerusalem, they teach you not to say the name. And they caused the people even as far as Galilee, because they were traveling there to keep the feast. So Yeshua had to show his 12 disciples the name Yahweh. Well, Jeremiah shows it in his time, just 600 years before Yeshua. Well, back to Hannah. Now, Hannah was bawling her eyes out because there was no righteousness in the house of Yahweh. Sure, Peninnah had a lot of children. And what were they doing? I had you read it a while ago. A big mess. A filthy mess, just like Jeremiah had to put up with. Hannah saw it, and she started crying out, "Let me have a son. Please let me have a son. I will raise that son, and when he is weaned," the word weaned. Oh, it has so much meaning, brother. It's you could bring sermons on top of sermons on this word, weaned. Hannah was promising Yahweh that if he would let her have a son, she would train him. She would train. This is what the holy women of Nu are doing. That's what they're doing now, and I'm crying for joy. Let me have a son, she said, and I'll train that son. I'll train him to resist evil. I'll train him to be a judge, a righteous judge over the house of Yahweh. And when I'm weaned him, when I've got him fully ready for service, I'll bring him to the house, and I'll give him to you all the days of his service. Well, this is what you really get out of Hannah. There's a lot more to it than that, but what she was promising and what she fulfilled brought forth the Savior, Yeshua Messiah. She had other sons too. The beautiful picture that took place right there and went for several thousand years down to Yeshua and his family. And then Yeshua was specially trained. Very specially trained. Then he took his job in the world. He wouldn't yield. He wouldn't yield to sin. He was offered big time all the kingdoms of the world. And he knew the position that Hillel had. He knew how she was established. He knew this. And he paid great respect to this woman. But he resisted her offer, just like Joseph did in Egypt, just like Moshe did in Egypt. Moshe could have done the same thing. He had all this offered to him. You know who trained him? Remember who trained him? His mother. His mother trained him by lamplight. Yes, his mother trained him in the ways of Yahweh. And from that training, he was able to say, "No, I don't want this. I want righteousness. I want to bring forth righteousness." Well, of course, he brought forth these people. He brought them out of Egypt. He set them on the right track. Samuel's time, Samuel's time, of course, when he got old, he had already set the pattern, though, and he had already had a generation of genes going that couldn't be moved. And this generation of genes that he had going came down to the Savior. But the training had to be there, or Yeshua wouldn't have been the Savior. That training that was actually given to Eve, the ability that was actually given to Eve to bring forth, that is, create and maintain, like was given to women. Well, that's what you're getting back now. All of this, and it's going to come not through force, but through teaching. Teaching and training. Hannah, you're a beautiful woman. You set an example for all of us. like Nora. Nora wouldn't have risked her life if she hadn't have known that Yeshua was the Savior. You could tell she is studying the Scriptures. You could tell these things that was given in the beginning. Where'd they learn it? In the beginning. Yahweh gave it to them. He gave them that knowledge, that whole thing that we're studying now, calling the Book of Yahweh. Remember the pattern that's set on the sea of glass for all to see? It was there. And Yahweh brought it to Eve. He established Hillel to teach Eve. And then she turned bitter. That's when Eve should have said, hey, wait, don't do this. She should have become the teacher. If you get the chance, if all of you get the chance to prove to Yahweh that you can do this, be sure and stand up for it. Don't even take a second thought of giving in to evil. I don't care who it's coming from. You can see priests turn sometimes. Priests are influenced sometimes. Or they get off on the right track, on the wrong track. And they get something in their mind, don't amount to much, but it raises hatred and arguments. So they either have to belittle themselves, put themselves down, humbly take this, and take the lessons and the teaching again and again and again sometimes. I'm talking to the priest here. Don't let Satan pull you in. She's expert at this. I'm talking to the women too. But this is the only house of Yahweh in these last days. This is it. Praise Yahweh. We right now are being established as Satan was. We're being established to do this great work of creating and maintaining righteousness. Creating and maintaining a righteous body of workers that will take over the whole universe, and they will rule as Yahweh rules. Now remember, Yahweh's glory is fully set. He writes down, he's having written down for all to see, and he laid it out to heaven and earth, and he says, this is the way it's going to be. I'm going to make man in my likeness and in my image. I'm going to give him authority. No, there won't be any that's not made in my likeness and image get this authority. And Yeshua said also the same thing in Matthew 7. And then he tells you, you won't see me anymore until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of Yahweh. And then he says, he quoted a scripture in Psalms 118, verse 26, that said, you're blessed out of the house of Yahweh. When? Not back in that time. They were receiving curses. Hannah, a woman brought forth righteousness. She brought forth the blessing that brought forth Yeshua, who is now high priest over the house of Yahweh. In the last days I will establish my house. In the last days, the nuclear days. That's what Yeshua said it is. In Matthew 24:29, the last days. That's it. That's the only time. It was taken away. Now it's brought back and offered to mankind. And the greatest gathering right now is taking place. You can be part of it. If you're not, you won't be too long. Yahweh bless you, and I'll turn the services back to the next leader. I love you.